subcommittee, we passed a strong bipartisan bill that ultimately and unfortunately died in the Senate. While I continue to advocate for privacy legislation, Madam Chair, I am also cognizant of the fact that privacy is not a panacea that will solve all of the internet connected problems that our nation currently faces. Today, in addition to privacy issues, we also face very real and very threatening threats from issues like misinformation, disinformation, and algorithmic bias. With that in mind, and while I look forward to working on comprehensive privacy legislation, I am pleased that we're addressing these other equally important issues as well. That said, Mr. Rowland, in your testimony, you state that, and I quote, children in lower-income households spent nearly 2 hours more with screens than children from higher-income households. And Black and Hispanic children spend significantly more time on screens than their white peers. You also describe how increased exposure to screen time is linked to increases in mental health issues such as depression. It is too often the case that when white America catches a cold, Black America catches pneumonia. And while I feel that this is true when it comes to screen time also. To that point, what type of impact is this increased screen time having in lower income households, and particularly for Black and Hispanic children? Has there been any data that shows how these outcomes compare to white children or children in higher income households?
Thank you so much for that question. Yeah, so as you referenced, the data shows that low income and Black and Hispanic children have more screen time and spend more time playing games and online than their higher income and their white peers. And you know, the data also shows that screen time linked problems like childhood obesity. There are much higher rates for low income children and Black and Hispanic children. So I think that, you know, given what we know about the severity of the problems linked to excessive screen time, and that these children from these communities are having even higher rates, it is absolutely essential that we pass policies to protect them. Like all issues, you know, this affects all children, but like every issue, children from marginalized communities, children from more vulnerable communities are getting the worst of it. And so that's why it's so important that we create a new set of rules and build a better internet for children, because we need to protect the most vulnerable among us.
Does this fact create problems in the public education sector? Also, is there any data that supports other ramifications of this particular phenomenon? Hello?
I'm sorry, I don't think I heard the question. Was that a question for me? I'm not sure if I heard it correctly.
It's for you. It's a second question. Is there any data that says that this particular phenomena affects the public education system, students in the public education system? Is there an effect on the increase in screen time on schools and children at school?
Yeah, well, there is data that shows the more time the kids are spending online for entertainment, though it's correlated with lower academic achievement. There has also been a rush to use EdTech in our schools and to see EdTech as a panacea for fixing educational inequality, when in fact what the data is showing is that the more hands-on learning that kids get, it's actually better for their academic achievement. So I think one of the things that's really worrisome is this, this idea that if schools invest heavily in EdTech platforms, that's going to fix educational inequality. And in fact, I think there's a real danger that it's going to worsen it, because what kids need is quality teachers. They need smaller class sizes. They need to interact with each other. And the more time that kids are spending on screens for their learning, it's taking away from those things.
Josh Golan, Executive Director of Fair Play.
I yield back, Madam Chair. Thank you for your indulgence.
The gentleman yields back, and now Ms. Rogers is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Ridge, thank you for your decades of service. Your experience at the FTC was under a Democratic chair, yet I appreciate your dedication to bipartisan consensus when possible, which had been the Commission's tradition. Yesterday, Mr. Bilirakis and I sent a letter to FTC Chairwoman Khan regarding the FTC's current direction. It expresses concern with the Commission's use of zombie voting to pass rules and the recent decision to delete legitimate business activity from the FTC mission statement. Given the number of bills before us, I think it's essential that we find a realistic enforcement balance. We need to know how the Commission would manage all these competing priorities without hurting legitimate business activity. This alarming mission statement change happened while the Build Back Better Act is pending in the Senate. That legislation includes an amendment to the FTC Act, which would give the Commission broad first offense penalty authority. How expansive is this proposed authority? Is there any commercial activity or sector of the economy that it wouldn't apply to?
The civil penalty provision in the Build Back Better Act, as I read it, would apply to anything covered by the FTC Act, unfair or deceptive practices under the FTC Act. So the FTC does lack jurisdiction over certain sectors of the marketplace, banks, nonprofits, certain functions of common carriers, but otherwise, as I understand the provision, if it were to pass, it would apply across wide swaths of the marketplace.
Thank you. Regarding the proposed new authorities, am I correct? This only deals with civil penalties and not remedies like disgorgement or restitution.
That's right. Civil penalties only.
During your FTC service, was the Commission able to predict how many violations would occur each year?
No.
That's in line with our experience. The FTC cannot predict who's going to break the law. I would note we supported and enacted such civil penalty authority targeting COVID-19 scams, and the Congressional Budget Office reported back that such revenues were insignificant over the 2021 to 2030 period. This might be a basic question, but if all companies are following the law, there's no violation of the FTC Act, and thus revenue is not generated via enforcement actions, correct?
Yes, although I've never seen a situation where all companies are not violating the law.
Given how broad the authority is and what we know of recent FTC changes and actions, I worry about the lack of regulatory certainty for small businesses. They, after all, are not experts like you on what protections they may have under the FTC Act. Is it fair to say that they may not have the resources or the sophistication to manage a review by the FTC of their operations?
Yes, but I'm not to be a broken record, but I think Congress can fix this problem by passing a privacy law that does provide standards.
Okay.
Attorney Jessica Rich.
I appreciate you answering those questions and providing the insight. And I do thank all the witnesses for being here. I want to note that we have incorporated first offense penalty authority in our comprehensive privacy and data security legislation, the Control Our Data Act, as a means of policy enforcement. And I urge this committee to take action. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back, and now I recognize Congresswoman Castor for her 5 minutes of questions.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Sikowski, for holding this very important hearing and for including my Kids Internet Design and Safety Act that I'm leading with Representatives Clark, Trahan, and Wexton, and of course Senator Markey and Blumenthal, and including the Social Media Data Act that Rep. Trahan and I are leading as well. We really do come to this hearing more so than other hearings as parents and as grandparents. We know, as Mr. Greenblatt said, these big tech companies are complicit in the harm that's being caused by online operations, and as Mr. Ahmed pointed out, profiting from the harm. So we clearly have to take action now on 230, on children's privacy, everyone's privacy, and especially the design of these platforms. So I want to focus in on the Kids Act. Mr. Golan, thank you very much for your years of work on this. So your testimony is that these big tech platforms like Instagram and YouTube and others, they intentionally design the way children interact online to kind of keep them addicted. Will you go into a little more detail on that?
Sure. And first of all, Representative Castor, thank you for your tireless work to see that children get the online protections that they deserve. So the business model for all of this media is to maximize engagement, because the more time a kid is on a platform, the more money they're worth to the platform. And so they design their platforms intentionally in ways to keep kids on those platforms and to keep them checking those platforms as often as possible. Just a few examples of that. They use things like rewards and nudges and push notifications. So things like Snap Streaks. So on Snapchat, kids are incentivized to communicate through Snapchat every day with a friend and then keep a streak going. And that becomes a very powerful motivation. It gamifies the relationship, and kids really want to keep that going. They use things like autoplay and infinite scrolls on TikTok to make it really, really, really easy to keep using a platform and really, really hard to disconnect. They use things like likes and follower accounts, and so everybody can see who's popular and whose posts are popular at any given moment. And this is a really powerful incentive for kids to create content, and not only just create content, but to create provocative content and risque content, because they know that's what's most likely to get them attention. And then, of course, there's the algorithmic recommendations, which personalize everything to kids to show them the content that is most likely to keep them engaged and keep going on a platform, regardless of whether that content is good for them. And in fact, as we've been talking a lot about lately, very often that content is terrible for them.
And I've been out when I'm out and about, and I see very young children now on tablets and iPhones. I mean, we're talking toddlers. And what does the latest research tell us about how young children are when they're first interacting with online platforms?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that's really disturbing is we all know that the age for social media, when you're supposed to go on social media, is 13. 40% of 9 to 12-year-olds report using TikTok every day, and the numbers are just about identical for Instagram and Snapchat.
And do they have the ability to kind of self-regulate at that age?
No, absolutely not. Executive functioning is still developing. It's very high. I mean, these are platforms that adults get lost in. These are platforms that, we're all struggling with as adults. And to think that developing children who are still developing their executive function and whose habits are being formed are using these platforms.
So how will the Kids Act then help parents and help address these harms that these online platforms are peddling and profiting off of?
So I think the Kids Act does a number of really important things. So first of all, it prohibits those design choices that are there to maximize engagement. Things like to children, things like autoplay, things like